Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Fight Chat Friday from TKD Coach Academy. This is episode 185, and we're going to do a little follow-up to an email that was sent out yesterday. And it's looking at three really deceptively simple questions that you can ask when you're coaching sparring. But these questions are actually really powerful as well. And we just want to go through the questions with you today, give you some ideas about how and when we'd use them, and maybe some insights as to the true power behind these questions. Okay, so Richie, do you want to go through just the three questions as they are?
Yeah, so the first one is very, very simple. So these come up as ways that we can maybe look for the experience from the athlete's point of view and the student's point of view. And also, the beauty of this is that you can also develop their understanding and broader understanding of the principles, particularly that involved in ITF sparring. So that's kind of what we're trying to get at, trying to get the people that are involved in the session to think more about what's going on, why things are working, etc. So that's all this is for. And also, if you do it right, it can really sculpt how you progress the exercise further, or maybe things you need to add, take away, etc. One thing that I actually do after having conversations like this is ask the students what they would like to include as the rule changes next. So let's keep the same game, exercise, constraint, whatever term you want to use. But what are the things that you think that we should include as rules, or things that we should maybe take away as techniques or whatever it may be. So the first question that we can kind of use to come up with this discussion and just get the ball rolling is, what did you notice in that game or exercise? And the idea here is just an open-ended question, looking for people to volunteer some information that they have, maybe thoughts they had, some things they were thinking, some experiences they had. And we did this yesterday. We have an exercise we call armed forces, which is very simple. It's just one side putting some pressure on through footwork, trying to close down space to get to another person who is using only sidekick to maintain distance. So we had this with the kids yesterday, and they came up with some ideas. Oh, once they got past my leg, it was very difficult for me, and I was kind of stuck for space. So then the whole idea of space came up, and the concept of how we need space and why we need space in sparring. So it was very good in that regard, and it allowed us to kind of develop it a little bit further. Then
So if I
the
may
the
then, just to hang on to that one, what you're doing straight away is you're opening a conversation. So what changes is, instead of you teaching something because it was on your mind to teach it, you're now
mhm.
teaching something because it has become relevant to the student to learn it. So that is a huge difference in terms of, you learn when your moment of learning has come. So if you can bring the student to a moment where learning is important to them, or where learning is for them, they're far more likely to actually absorb the information and learn, than if you had just decided today's lesson is, and I'm going to
Yeah.
tell you what it is. That wasn't relevant to them. That was for everyone, not for them. But once it's for them and they've identified what they wanted to learn, it's way more powerful.
Exactly. And then it can kind of take its own path in a way then as well, of maybe my intention was to work on sidekick and maintaining distance, but then eventually the session kind of turned into how we can create angles to get around the sidekick for the other person, and it can take its own kind of path in that way as well. But also, like you alluded to, the learning for those particular students is actually relevant to their experience, so they have a hands-on experience because, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about because this happened to me while we were going through it. So
Yeah.
it's much more effective that way. The second question then that we have is, what were you thinking during that, whether it's the game, the exercise, the technique you threw, etc. And what, like, we can also get people to come out and demonstrate the last exercise, maybe some students who thought were doing well or whatever that may be, and like,
Okay.
what were you
We have to
thinking
know
in
it's
those
still the right
particular
decision.
moments.
Super.
So that can be something that we can do here. We have an example, for example, here from our seminar where you can take it out, and this just opens up a discussion. So we can ask this guy here, what are you thinking in this moment, or what are you trying to do when this situation occurs, or wherever it may be. And again, like, we're not looking for any answers, we're looking for a discussion to evolve and for us to kind of be able to further develop the exercise and progress it in a way that we can develop even better skills. And then, like, what is the takeaway from today's session is a big part then as well. So that's something that we discussed yesterday also. It can be like, what are the things that you got better at today in training with your sparring? And some people said, oh, I got better at using my sidekick, I got better at my reverse punch, because that was actually progression that they suggested. So some great things can come for sure if you use it. But the last question, I think, is one of the most valuable. What did your partner do that made your job either harder or easier? And this is very, very effective, especially we discussed last week's episode, Adrian, of having two active sides and
Yeah.
never having one side of just like the dummy or holding a target or whatever. They actually have a job, a mission, a task, an objective, whatever term you want to use, to get done. And when both people have an objective, then you can have that discussion of what was done that made your job easier, what was done that made your job harder, and then that can develop into further discussions as well.
So what I really love about this as well is if you go, if anyone's been watching our episodes for long enough, you know that we use very often something approaching a constraints-led approach to introducing new skills or to developing skills or how skill acquisition works. But what we're trying to get at with some of these questions is question one is, what did you notice? So if we bring the questions up like this, what did you notice? So we're talking about perception. So if
Mm-hmm.
we, from the outside, we see a coach's eye view, we don't see the athlete's eye view of what they're doing. So what we're asking them in that is, hey, what are you paying attention to? What are you attending to? What's pulling your focus? And that gives us some initial exercises initial insight into what's working and what's not working about our game design. So we want them to attend to the right things, because if we're getting them to, we're trying to create affordances for action. We're trying to create opportunities to notice something that suggests an appropriate solution, or an appropriate movement solution. So we want to see, hey, are these athletes actually noticing the right things? If not, maybe we need to tweak the game. We go from there into there, well, what were you thinking? Because again, uh, we're not inside their heads. So we don't know if something isn't working. Maybe they're focusing or attending to the wrong thing. Maybe the issue is that they're not confident, or they're aware of some other distinction. Maybe there's something else going on that we're not paying attention to. But it also tells us, hey, well, I'm looking for when their foot lifts off the floor. It's like, oh, okay. Well, maybe there would be a better visual cue that you could look at. Maybe you could have your eyes focusing somewhere else. Maybe instead of thinking about blocking the foot when it comes off the floor, we could be looking at just maintaining distance between the two people, or we could be, there are different things we could look at. And then finally, as you get to that last bit, what did your partner do that made your job easier or harder? You're getting a great connection between the two active players. You're allowing them to coach each other. You're allowing one person to say, hey, you know what? Every time you step, your back foot moves, or just before you kick, you drop your front hand, or I'm seeing these things that makes it a little bit easier for me to read what you're at. And then the other person goes, oh, I didn't know that was a thing I did. So instead of the coach telling them, it's way, way, way more effective if their partner tells them, because the partner also gave the demonstration of, well, what happens when you give away the secret. And even
Mm.
if it's something else, even if it's something like, well, I can't tell when your blitz is coming, I keep getting caught. The other person then can, engage in the conversation and say, oh, that's because every time I step into your space, you react by lifting your front leg, you try to kick, and the space is too close. And then we can kind of get involved as a coach, freeze frame, go back to there and get them to offer suggestions, improvements, other things to try. So I love how the questions let us get from an outside observer who's very peripheral to what's going on, to having a direct kind of insight into what's going on in both people's heads, and then also getting that third layer of communication where they're communicating with each other about what they're actually seeing from each other. So we really get down from that perception to action to that evolution that you talked about, where it's like, okay, well, based on this, where do we need to go to next to evolve this skill?
That's it. And it also develops naturally then the idea of the sparring partners becoming better partners for each other. And once
Mm.
this is ingrained as young kids, it's just what they do. And then all of a sudden, now the advanced class, the teenage group, the black belts, whatever, they naturally have these discussions then as a result, which makes them better for themselves to understand, but also it makes them more aware of the game and give them what we call those brain gains of sparring, which essentially are essential because when you're sitting in the chair, you might have the answers for somebody, but you can only help them so far as a coach. They are in there by themselves in the sparring ring at a competition. They need to understand the game themselves. So the better you can do that and facilitate that, it's going to definitely be of value to them as opposed to you just giving them the answers all the time because they won't take them as much. You know what I mean? They always have to search for you to get the correct answer, and that's not what we really want. Although it's very difficult because I know myself, sometimes I find that hard when you have the answer and you want to give them the answer and help them.
It's a
It's only
shortcut.
natural as a coach, exactly, but it's probably not the best thing for them.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, folks, hopefully you found that one interesting. Certainly, questions we find useful all of the time. And maybe in the next week or two, we can look at where this goes and how to put this into practice in at ringside coaching. So that's us for this week. See you next time.
Yeah, see you next time. And if you do want to get involved in the email newsletter that did go out yesterday, make sure you do. So click on this QR code. You'll also get a free guide, 10 ways to instantly improve your sparring when you do so. And you'll get a weekly email with these takeaways that we have from our own experience.